All right, so we are live with Jon Frankel. I said live, we're actually not live, we're just recording this, but you'll see it on YouTube nonetheless. So Jon Frankel is the man who interviewed us for HBO Real Sports. How you doing today, John?
I'm well, guys. How are you?
Doing well, doing
Doing
well.
very good. Yeah, thanks for
We don't
coming
normally
Better
start
than
off
the
with
last time I saw you.
on.
I feel like I've gotten taller, so I do feel good about that. So, yeah, we appreciate you coming on. We obviously had a lot of people. It made quite a bit of buzz, the Real Sports story in the card world, for the better. I mean, the fact that it was on HBO on Real Sports. I am curious. My first question: do you have any idea how many viewers you guys are hitting on those shows at roughly?
You know what? I don't, and I wish we did. And I think it's one of the metrics of HBO that's complicated because obviously we don't have advertising and so forth. So it's always been difficult. And one of the things I'm sure you guys are finding this out to be true too is the whole media landscape changes. I used to when we just premiered right on last Tuesday,
hmm
and it was a slightly different time than normal. We're 10 o'clock Eastern usually on the East Coast with HBO. But anyway, it used to be that you'd immediately, even in modern day, recent history, you'd get texts pretty soon after, or you'd get phone calls or emails from friends. Now, like because of the way the world watches, like I might not hear from somebody for 2 or 3 months. Oh, just caught your piece, because people just don't watch things in real time anymore. I mean, you guys obviously they pay attention to in real time. People,
Sure.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
HBO. But no, that's the thing. So I don't know the numbers.
Okay, I'll tell you one thing: the amount of people who had no idea that me and Jesse played with baseball cards was pretty funny to see. Like that was kind of the biggest outreach from people who are not in the hobby. Didn't know you still played with those things. Sounds like it's doing okay. That's cool. People in the hobby, same thing. It was like, hey, we're on HBO. We've kind of collectively as a community, hey, we've kind of made it. So
And I'm sure you told them that it's not child's play anymore.
Oh
yeah,
man,
yeah, we
far
did.
from it.
What we've found out and observed.
Yeah. So I am curious. So what turned you onto the sports card market in general? What led to the piece being made?
I think we just were fascinated. We saw trends and we kept reading different articles. It's one of the great things about our producers, Chapman Downs, who you met, and James Grouchos. They're good about connecting dots. Unlike the government, sometimes we are. We're good at it after the fact. I don't mean to politicize. I'm just saying that they're good at saying, "Oh, wait a minute! I read an article here. I saw something there. I heard a podcast here. Let's start to look and let's connect all this." And obviously, along with traditional trading cards, NFTs have become something of a conversation piece.
Mm-hmm.
And even going back 3-4 months ago, I remember actually a good friend of ours, our sons are really good friends, and she said, "You heard these NFTs?" And I'm like, "Huh?" I vaguely, heard, rumors of these things. And then she started to try to explain to me, and I was like, "Huh?"
Yeah.
And then
Which is the reaction of everybody, by the way. Nobody could explain those things
Yeah.
yet. So.
and by the way, it's still
Mhm.
now I understand them in
Mhm.
principle. I still don't get collecting them, but that's my thing. I'm sure.
Hey, I am curious. How long have you and Chapman worked together? Your producer.
Well, what it is at HBO, we have a wonderful system where we rotate. So you don't work with one producer on a regular basis. And so I've been at the show now since 2006. So we're talking, if my math, if I were good at math, I'd be on Wall Street. But 15 years. So Chap and I have done a bunch of pieces over the years.
I told Jesse, that was my biggest takeaway. I said, these guys are talking to me. They're like dancing together out here. Like it was like you would say something and he would kind of cut in and say something to you. And I was like, these two are just like lockstep. Me and Jesse butcher each other all the time and jump all over. I was very impressed by like the line of communication. And it just seemed like you guys had like, hey, this is the focus. This is what we're going to go with. I thought that I was very impressed by that. So yeah, I thought that was cool.
I think that, that's a feather in his cap. I think that the producers, we're a small enough staff that you work with people on a fairly regular basis.
Mhm.
You might work with the same producer twice in a year, given the number of pieces that they do and we do. But I think you learn the give and take, and we huddle together. We talk about what it is we want to get out of a certain interview and what we're looking for and what the objective is, and then we go from there. And typically, because my mind is going 100 different directions, they'll hear something that maybe I skipped over, and they'll say, "Hey, can you follow up on this? Can you try this again?"
So, John, I've got a question. As far as the interview goes, I know like when we were at the show, there was a lot of recording being done, and there was only a small snippet that just included Mike in the interview. So, my question is, of all the things that you guys recorded, was there anything that you found interesting, whether it made it into the show or not into the show? Something surprised you about the hobby or anything like that?
So you know what? It was interesting, and I think Mike mentioned it. We were talking about it. I think when the three of us were huddled together just before we actually started recording. So this isn't stuff that was left on the edit room floor because I don't know if I actually addressed it on camera. But there were two observations that I had when we were in the immediacy of your booth. Mm-hmm. One was when we talked about how Dr. J didn't have a lot of value today, other than his presence on that. What was it? The triple card with Magic and Bird, correct?
Yep. Correct.
Okay. So that was one of the things that struck me. I'm just curious, obviously from having grown up watching Dr. J play, you think of him as this larger than life character. And then coincidentally, right after we did the interview, I had to do an interview with Dr. J for something else.
Should have brought him by the booth.
And and so that was interesting. But what it played into, I remember, was we talked about how LeBron's card hasn't increased in value because of his voice on social and political issues.
Gotcha.
Yep. I thought that was really interesting. And that was something that I would have loved to have, probed further and discussed and brought out. If our conversations with Brian after the pieces run were 5 minutes or 10 minutes long,
sure,
I thought that would have been really interesting. So that struck me. And then there's something else. I don't know if you guys remember, Brian said something at the beginning of our conversation after the piece ran, and he said, all right, this seems like a lot of young white guys.
Oh, that's all everybody's talking about, John.
Yeah, so guys in the hobby, that was the takeaway. That's why I text you and said I like you more than I like Brian. And I stand by that.
So it is interesting because I obviously that's not entirely the case, but as I think I said to Mike and maybe Jesse to you at the same time, that was my observation when you look at that convention hall as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. There's very little, at least within my scan, of minority presence, you know? And so Brian has a way of seeing things that you don't touch on or holes in pieces very quickly. He's very astute that way. He's obviously also very sensitive to certain things.
Sure.
And but those were two things that I think, listen, I haven't scoured the country, so I don't know who's doing all of the collecting. I can only say from what I observed in that room.
Sure.
Yeah, and honestly, John, I think the takeaway was, for the most part, I mean, I thought almost everybody I've spoken to, and myself included, I said the same thing to Jess. I liked your presentation of the documentary, of the story, whatever you want to call it. Is that room filled majority of white males? No question. I just hated the fact that after this cool piece, it was like, hey, by the way, there were two things that stood out to me. That was the first one, and I was like, first of all, that's fair. We are seeing more, quote unquote, minorities coming in, more women, and it's not like it's this way. Like for me, for example, I don't care who wants to buy my stuff. The more people that come in, I'm happy about. But it doesn't change the fact that the majority, I think are white male. That's the demographic, no question.
But I think, Mike, you also touched on something which is also interesting, right? And Brian didn't take away, and maybe if the host of our show was a woman who was asking me questions,
sure,
her response would have been, her observation might have been, young white males, where are the women?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Which I actually, it's one thing Chap and I talked about, because at one point I did see a couple of women, but they didn't seem to be so much traders as they were people who were working with booths. And
absolutely.
Yeah, they actually had a separate little card night for women during the show, just because, it is recognized there aren't as many women in the hobby, but it is starting to grow, and they're trying to bring that group together to, let them know it's okay to be a part of this hobby too. It's not just a man's sport.
Well, listen, we're looking at a piece now, nothing new. It's gambling and the accessibility of gambling, mm-hmm. right? And one of the things I asked another producer, not Chapman, was, are there women who are getting into trouble And what I mean by trouble, I mean who are becoming addicted, because that's one of the aspects of the piece that we're looking at. Mm-hmm. So are these websites and these digital gambling sites attracting women who, listen, we all know there are women, lots of women sports fans out there. Mm-hmm. Do they fall into the same sort of, potholes that men are falling into when it comes to these things? But anyway, so you could say the same thing about trading cards, about gambling. Brian just has those are his observations and takeaways, but he does have a way of, being very astute in seeing something that seems very obvious to him and saying, hey, what's with this? I mean, same way he talked about, the IRS. And
sure.
I'm sure that ruffled a few feathers.
And again, it does. And quite frankly, if it ruffles your feathers because you're not paying, I have no issue. That's on you. I mean, we formed an LLC. We pay our monthlies. We pay our quarterlies. That's part of doing business. The race issue being brought up, I was kind of like, that. Let's say that is true. Does that? I just was kind of like, what's the connotation here? Like that we don't want other people. We're cool. The more people that come into the hobby, the better for everybody. Period. But he definitely has a different standpoint.
I realized after the fact that my response should have been, what I really want somebody to investigate is where's the bubble gum. I don't care about where the gum.
What happened to the gum?
I want to know where the bubble gum is.
Good news. There's been a lot of huge hobby news since then, and that's pretty much all Topps is going to make from now on is bubble gum.
Candy. Yeah, they'll be getting cut out.
I didn't even realize that they, when Fanatics moved in on their territory, and obviously it's a huge thing that Topps, I mean, that's what we traditionally all identify with. It's synonymous with trading. I didn't realize they owned Bazooka.
Yeah.
But let me turn the tables on you for a second, since it is my job to in part ask questions.
Sure. And you do it better than us. I have no issue saying that either.
Not at all. Not at all. That's not true. Which is, what did you guys find most interesting, and what did you think we left out that would have been interesting for the viewer to see?
So here was my takeaway, and easy for me to say. First of all, it was a 20-minute piece.
A little less, but yeah.
Right. So how much can you get it? So I did, like, for example, I should have been in it a lot more. No. Nate Burns, like, for example, my buddy Nate, I would have been, and it's easy for me to say, I think from your demographic at HBO, people want to hear, oh, these guys have come in. This is a money-making machine. I understood why it made that angle. Me as a hobbyist, which, again, this doesn't play to the masses, so it wouldn't have made sense. I would have loved to have seen, okay, Nate's flying on a private jet. He's got millions of dollars in cards. He came from next to nothing. I came from probably even less. I like that buildup of the story. I like Adam. Me and Adam did a $20,000 deal last night. At the same time, Adam's a kid. If Adam's $5,000 goes broke tomorrow, his mom's still making his bed. Like, I don't feel, and I like it. That's not a shot at him. I would have loved to have seen the buildup, but I also don't think that's as appealing to the masses. So selfishly, I like that. I don't think it would have played as well as how you guys did it, quite frankly.
That may be the case. And look, because we've got a limited time, as you know, as you pointed out, that we've got to sort of accent some of the things. Do we sometimes focus on the low-hanging fruit of money and private planes and such? I think that just helps illustrate the point, which is that this business is just blowing up, and in a good way. And look at that. And I think I agree with you. I love Nate's story. And I love the fact, and I think we alluded to it, when I said, look, you started out you were selling homes, and you said in a good typical year, you were doing 40, 50 grand, and now you're doing this. But it's funny because I've exchanged a couple texts with Nate since, and he was kind enough to actually send me a Florida football helmet.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
For my office collection. But we were talking about it, and he said he's looking to find a documentarian to help tell his story in at greater length. And I do think it's a really interesting story.
And that's probably the setting, right? I don't know that Real Sports is a setting for an hour-long deep dive in a guy starting a card shop. I don't know. I just don't think that's the setting for it. I think it is a better story, but again, I'm invested in this, so to me, it's more interesting.
I will say that I think the NFT portion of the show was interesting because there are still that it is a subsection of this hobby that there is some interest in. It is very well panned among like traditionalists. Like they don't like the NFT. It's not something that they're as favorable of. And the guy that you had on we have some questions about those numbers he was giving.
Yeah,
as far
I'd like to see that 12 million. I'll tell you that.
That Top Shot, it very well may have jumped to 20 million, but I could almost guarantee it's not at 12 now. It's probably much, much lower. But
I don't disagree, and I wish, to be honest, I wish that and we have no input. I wish that in our conversation, again, however brief with Bryant, that we had been able to delve into that a little bit more, into the NFT component.
Yeah, and I think that the overall, as far as what you guys covered, given the amount of time, I think it covered the entire hobby well. Selfishly, as someone who wants to see the hobby grow even more, I would love to see like maybe just a more basic breakdown of what constitutes the hobby, like getting into it, as far as like it's not just about grading, or it's not just about collecting cards anymore. There's a whole subsection of getting your cards graded and then breaking these cards, which you did cover to some degree online, but I think some people may have liked a little bit more detail into that, because I don't view a break online as like a gamble necessarily, because everyone's getting something out of it. You're not walking away without anything. And I would like to open that up to the masses, because I think it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like a treasure hunt to be a part of that. It's not as necessarily like a scary thing, like, oh, I may lose money on it, which is what typically when I think of gambling, like I think of it more scary than fun type of thing. So
right, no, and that's a Jesse, that's a point well made, that you're still walking away with some cards, whether they're jackpot cards or not. It's not like, ooh, I bought a stock and then boom, it turns into nothing, or I went to the casino and I walk away with nothing but ice cubes in a glass. I get it.
But considering the time, I think you covered it very well, though.
No, but I think also the thing that was probably important for us to point out, which is that this is not, and I think Mike made this point very clearly, which is that you got to do your homework. This is not fly by night. Oh, I see that Adam, some 18-year-old kid is all of a sudden making money. Like, let me go down to the local store and buy some cards. That there's a real thought process involved in this. The same way that somebody who wants to invest in stocks, they better be reading the fine print.
Yeah. Overall, though, I thought that was a fair take. The other thing too, I thought was interesting, which ties in really closely with the Fanatics deal. One of Brian's other questions, I didn't like it, but again, he rubbed me the wrong way for whatever reason. I'm very easily irritated. I'm from Boston and I'm short. It's a bad mix. He asked about like the players getting their cut, and that is one thing that's huge with the Fanatics deal. The Players Association are now going to be on those negotiations. But I'll be honest with you. The first thought, again, in my head, I was like, I see HBO Real Sports do stuff all the time. Do the athletes get a cut of that show? They do get a cut of cards, because I know they're paid for their signing, they're paid for their likeness to a degree. But that was another angle. I thought we had a very positive 20 minutes, and then just the 2 minutes of, honestly, to me, it was almost like 2 minutes of race, IRS guys who are just not paying their taxes, and where's the players cut? And I thought, man, no one in this room cares about race. That's not true. People in every room probably care about race. Let me take that out. But fine. The IRS thing, I was like, I don't know. If you don't pay taxes anywhere, you're an idiot, and they're going to catch you eventually. Pay your taxes. Right. And the players cut thing, I was like, I don't know. I've seen a lot of HBO Real Sports stories about the NBA. I mean, you're shipping checks to Paul Pierce. The other thing I just thought was kind of an interesting twist.
I think Brian thought the story was too positive, and he wanted to bring it down a little. He wanted it opposite side.
But I liked your response, John. On those ones, I thought you kind of say, I think they are getting their cut, which. Again, I
had read that the Players Association was very involved in the deal with Fanatics. Mike, that is the largest. I'm glad to see somebody else drinks like Fred Flintstone, like me.
Mason jar, baby.
That's how we do it in the
That's how we do it in the
baby.
South.
When I show up with a water bottle at the table, my wife looks at me like, "Okay, you need to go sit with the dogs." But it's. Right. I saw that the Major League Baseball Players Association was very involved and wanted a real say in how that money was going to be divided. And you're right. Yeah, listen, I'm not so sure I'd want to have this guy. This is an interesting conversation, because I'm not so sure I'd want to have a debrief with viewers and people who participated in pieces every time we ran a piece.
Well, you're also dealing with a very critical person. And like I said, overall, I said to Jesse, he asked me, hey, what my first response, 80%. 80% of this was totally positive, very accurate to the demographic it's reaching, and overall good for the hobby, because exposure is the biggest thing. I mean, how many sports fans who will never miss a Patriots game or a Celtics game, whatever, insert whatever team you want, have never bought a baseball card?
Right.
That's what's lacking here. That is the demographic we need to open up to. So I'm all for the exposure. And I thought at the end of the day, that was my biggest takeaway. Good exposure for the hobby, without question.
Absolutely.
Well, but I think, your point about paying athletes and such, I mean, this is obviously, I'm treading into sensitive territory here, but it's, we don't have a ton of big name athletes on our show, probably less than we did. You go back to when the show started in 95.
Sure.
Right? And what did the landscape look like in media and compared to today? And, that was pre-social media and such. Like, people don't generally, like, the big names don't need us to,
right.
I mentioned the other day, we should try and get Deion Sanders, who's now coaching at Jackson State. Be really interesting. He's been, he's obviously such a personality. He's a great interview. Apparently we've tried a bunch of times, and one of the producers said to me, I think he's doing some kind of a docu-series or a Netflix or one of these. And I was like, okay, of course, because everybody's doing one except, about me, but
right.
Which is fine. I'm not worthy of one. But the point being is that they can control their own message. They can be the producers and executive producers of a docu-series about them. And do they really need to sit down with us and face those really tough questions?
Yes.
Or be, have us, have Bryant, pick them apart in an interview. I remember Bryant did one with Derek Jeter, and it was, they sort of probably banged heads a little bit.
Yeah, why open yourself up to that when you can just control your own narrative totally on social media? Yeah, I mean, again, I hate that it's like that, because we run into the same problem, and I'd name drop Simmons everywhere I go with our interviews to get our guests, and it's still the same thing. A lot of these athletes, and these kids are 10, 15 years younger than me and Jesse, and it's like, hey, that's cool. I've got 18 million followers across my socials, which, to their credit, good for you. Like, if you can build your own brand and make the money, awesome. Like, I think that's great.
Yeah. No, it's speaking of building brands, I'm curious whether you guys now, what's going to happen with name, image, likeness and college athletes and trading cards? Are they going to be allowed to do those?
Yeah, so it's going to open up kind of my theory on that is we're going to see almost an NFT-like thing happen here, where you're going to see a lot of pop-ups have one or two athletes that they're going to pay. I think you're going to see the major companies get involved as well, because, now you can just directly deal with either schools or athletes and start using the likeness in college. So, what's better than a rookie card? A card that comes out 2 years before, some people will view it as. So,
that's right. So now you're sort of jumping. You're getting even. It's like recruiting the kid in 8th grade before he becomes, instead of when until he's a senior.
Absolutely. It will be interesting, John, because right now that is not as popular. Like, even if you can get a college uniform of a player, it's not as popular of a card as, once they go pro. So to see if those cards really take off, I'll be interested to see myself. But it is interesting that they're now opening it up. And if it's not no longer like a faux pas to have a college player, then maybe it opens it up to, younger and younger audiences, which brings in more people, which we won't hate. So,
right. I mean, you may be talking in a lot of places, right? You're talking about altogether different fan base, right? If you're in a town like Tuscaloosa, where there's no major league sports, and you are a diehard Alabama fan,
absolutely,
right? Yeah. You're going to want Mac Jones when he was, on photo day of his freshman year or his senior year, before he ever got to the Patriots. I mean, that might, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good example. Like Tua, for example, has a huge cult-like following. Not really done that much in the pros, and I'm high on Tua. But if you told those guys in Alabama 2-3 years ago, hey, there's Tua cards while he's playing in school, we've never seen that. We've seen college cards after they leave the school, but never during. So right. I do think like I said, like the NFT thing, I think are a lot going to shoot up and be devalued garbage, but I think there's going to be some that pop up that have real staying power and that really catch on.
Right. And you guys can talk to the fact that as I sort of surmise from our doing this piece, which is the baseball cards, which were the traditional cards from when I was growing up, right, are still king, right? I mean, even more so than, yes, the basketball NFTs and Giannis right now, but but baseball still rules, certainly over football and probably over basketball. Correct? So, like,
yeah, I
To
mean,
some degree.
vintage baseball is still, I think, what most people would consider the hallmark of the sport. The 52 mantle, most would argue, is the most iconic card across any sports demographic period.
I-
The T206 Wagner. I mean, so when you talk about real money, and a lot of times you'll see guys like me, we come into it chasing the active players. But at some point you grow up a little bit and say, hey, I want to diversify and play a little safer and get a blue chip stock. I go to vintage baseball. I go to Willie Mays, Mantle, Hank Aaron, whatever. Basketball is certainly catching on, though. I mean, for new stuff, basketball is unbelievably hot because the Asian market is incredible right now.
Right.
So,
well, especially for new guys coming into the hobby, it seems like that is what they're seeking more than anything. Unfortunately, baseball is just not as popular of a sport.
Well, I was going to say that's the appeal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the younger kids today aren't watching baseball; they're watching basketball.
And then football's always been kind of the forgotten of the three. Although with last year's draft class, quarterbacks drive the market. With this year's class being as hot as it is, with 5 potential starting QBs, this year's football has been hotter than any prospect class we've seen in the sport.
Wait, this just reminded me. Do you guys have a second for me to grab something? I want to show you.
Absolutely. Something. I'm gonna chill with my mason jar.
What are you drinking there, Mike?
He's gonna go grab Brian Gumble. He's coming. I've been doing my mix-ins, man. Crystal Light, no sugar.
Oh, wow.
Or in a mason jar. Call it a day.
The strawberry or the lemonade Crystal Light?
I got strawberry, lemonade, banana. So.
Okay, I'm going to show you something that this is the one thing that I collected when I was a kid, more than baseball cards, because I was such a football guy. But so this is going to end up, Jesse, when you asked me about what ended up on the cutting room floor and you didn't care about, this is going to be one of those things on your show. You're going to be like, oop, razor blade right there. Okay, so when I was growing up, and you've probably never seen these things.
Okay.
So this was 1972, obviously, as you can see. And at the time, so I basically grew up in New York, but I was born down in D.C., in the D.C. area. And Sunoco gas stations had this thing with the NFL. So you had these incredible books, right, with these like great pictures, of action. But then what you had each team. And it's basically the starting. Can you see? Am I?
Yep.
Yeah.
You're good.
There we go. I need a little tip from a game show host.
There's our thumbnail right there. Perfect.
So these were thumbnail stickers of the players, and it would list their name and such, and then underneath. Okay, here I happen to pull up a big one. Here's Bill Curry. Remember Coach Bill Curry? He coached at Alabama. Do you guys know him at all?
I can't say I do. Bill Curry. And Jesse doesn't watch sports. So
I love sports, John.
Anyway, so it's underneath it would say height, weight, position, college, etc. It was wasn't a trading card in the same traditional way. Anyway, they would list all. But
I mean, that's the thing though. Stickers are a very huge part of this game too, as far as not necessarily in the US, but like soccer stickers. That's a huge collector item.
Oh, soccer stickers from the 70s and 80s are the rage of Europe. It's insane. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that you may want to hold on to those. You don't know.
I mean, he's held on to it since 72. It's not going anywhere now. You can't give up on it.
No. I'll tell you. The truth is behind this is that we were on a road trip. And in fact, we were very close. We were headed to Nashville from Colorado. And I was with my wife and 2 daughters. My son wasn't with us. And we're doing this road trip. And at some point, we were somewhere and I saw a Sunoco gas station and I just had one of these mental lapses. I was like, God, I don't remember seeing Sunocos. I didn't know they were still around. Of course they are, but I just had, and I started to tell my daughters about this. And at the time, my 14-year-old, she logged it away in her memory. And then she went on eBay and she found them. And for a birthday present,
cool.
That's pretty cool.
2 years. I mean, it was like, she's like, Dad, I held on to it for 8 months. It was killing me. I so wanted to give it to you. And I opened it. I'm telling you, I was so touched. It was one of the greatest gifts I've ever gotten.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I like that. That's pretty cool.
Piece of nostalgia there.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool.
So what's next for you guys? What's coming down the pipe in terms of the business and the show?
So the podcast is going well. So that's been our big focus is brand expansion now. Podcast is going really well. We're doing well in that space for what we're at. We signed on with a talent agency that we met at the National, the show, Octagon, who's massive. So we're hoping to get a few things. We're not supposed to say a whole lot, but we're hoping to get a few more big things out of that. And then, just kind of keep plugging along, build the brand out, build our own YouTube.
When you talk about building out your brand, I mean, are you guys talking, acting? Are you
taking over the world? Anything we want to be on HBO. We want to have our own 60-minute piece on HBO soon. We're pretty excited. No, but I mean, there's been some TV opportunities that have come up. Different news outlets have reached out fairly frequently since then. So, we're 6 months old. So we're really just trying to make people aware, first of all, and then kind of, see what avenues open up. Because I think there's still a lot of people coming into the space.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
So when Real Sports does their next interview on what's next in the hobby, we assume it'll only focus on the two of us, and that'll be it.
Without a doubt. I mean, you guys are, as you said, you're taking over the world. So
that's the goal. Yeah.
You guys are going to be like, well, what do we need you for? We can control our own.
Never, John.
We'll never forget you, John.
Not a
We're
chance.
taking you with us.
You and Chapman on the good list. So.
All right.
But we appreciate the time. Hey, we really liked the piece. I mean it. We really enjoyed your part of the piece.
80% of it, Mike. 80%.
Your 80% we liked. Brian's I could have lived without. There you go. I can't be any more straightforward than that. So, and we appreciate the time today because I did have questions. I was curious about some things we got to actually ask you about. So we appreciate you making a few minutes for us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you. You guys made time for us, so we really are grateful.
Good deal. We'll catch you down the road, John. Thank you, sir.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, that was cool.
Yeah. I'm glad we at least got to ask him about a few of those things. Like I said, I thought he had a very balanced, just in general, I just thought he had a very balanced view of it. And I liked his spin on things. Like I said before, I didn't love the Gumble angle on some of that stuff, but
I was curious if it was going to be like if Simmons came on and said something that we didn't care for, and then someone else asked us about it. It's like you're talking about your boss behind his back. Sure. It's like, what do you say in those situations? I think he handled it really well, and the fact that he wasn't necessarily like on board for it, it seemed like I thought that was cool that he mentioned. Yeah,
I mean, like you said, if someone asked me, "Hey, Bill did this." Okay. Yeah. At the end of the day, I mean, you kind of pick the people you ride with and you, so what are you going to do? So I thought he was very, very balanced, very reasonable. So there you go. We went a little overtime. We're trying to keep this stuff short for the YouTube channel, but we'll, that's our goal. Kind of keep pumping out different interviews and different people in the hobby. And I thought, the HBO Real Sports to me is still by far the biggest exposure the world has ever had to sports cards. So huge positive takeaway in that respect. Couple negative little, blips on the map, I guess. Who cares? But overall, a good thing. So there you go. That was Jon Frankel from HBO Real Sports. I am Mike. He is Jesse, the Rhodes Scholar Gibson. Can we start that? Is that a thing?
That's what
How have I never heard of this? I've never started that before.
The Rhodes Scholar is what my nickname was in college.
That's it. We'll see you guys Thursday for the podcast. Goodbye.